Welcome to the June 2026 CIECA webinar, ADAS Calibration, Issues, Challenges, and Opportunities. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenters are Joel Adcock of Rev ADAS, Dan Dutra of Pace ADAS, and James Spears of Tractable. Now, as we start the webinar, I want to remind you there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenter. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the question panel on the webinar screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. Joel, I'd like to start with you. Where do you see the biggest disconnect in today's ADAS repair process?
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it, and glad to be part of this panel. And I'm excited to kind of dive into this. So I think, really in how I look at the current state of the industry as far as it relates to ADAS, and I think it's a lot of people assume that it's whether or not calibrations are being identified, and I think that's one part of it. But I think the biggest piece is there's so much disconnect between the resources that we're pulling as far as from an identification standpoint to OEM procedures to estimatic data to diagnostic information. If we've got DTCs or we need remote support, I think there's so many different moving parts and pieces that a lot of shops just kind of get, as we were kind of talking about early on in this, before we went live here, about some of the confusion that exists among the shops as far as like what to do with all of this information. How do we create this shared layer of intelligence and knowledge from sort of one party to the next or one department to the next? I think that's the biggest piece of disconnect that I see. And I think back to like when I worked at a shop and I wrote estimates, I always wanted my file to kind of tell a story from preliminary estimate to final file. And nowadays, I think you've got to think about things a little bit differently in terms of like, as you push the car through the repair process, it can't be just the same way you did things 10 years ago as far as thinking of traditional collision repairs. It's got to be running parallel path with a diagnostic plan as well, from anything from pre-scan to post-scan, in-process scans to calibrations to anything from a diagnostic standpoint and programming as well. So that as those things marry up with the traditional collision repair story, that it tells that same solid story, so that if you're not looking at the car but you're looking at the file, all of that information is easily digestible by whoever is associated with that particular claim, or if it's a customer pay information. I think that's really the biggest piece where I see right now is a lot of that disconnect. Isn't necessarily on the identification side, but more of we're pulling all of this information. How do we aggregate it? How do we kind of like share it into our file so it creates this bona fide layer of intelligence that somebody could read and understand from start to finish.
Yep. Great, thanks.
Yeah, Paul, one of the things when I look at that question, I see it as, what organization do you see solving the biggest disconnect? It's clearly CIECA. And I think that's why you had this conversation today. I couldn't imagine another group taking on a challenge of this size, but all the players that we need to solve this problem, they are CIECA members.
Great. Dan, I know you've been a strong advocate for building standardized processes in this area of ADAS calibration. Why do the collision and ADAS industries need a standardized process?
Well, Paul, it's a great question. I think it's important to clarify what we're talking about. This initiative is not about creating new repair procedures or new standards per se. The OEMs already provide these procedures, and they should remain the authority. What we're discussing is creating greater consistency around how ADAS calibrations are performed, documented and validated across the industry. Joel talks about having, these stages, and he and I have had conversations about process. A lot of people really don't understand what they should be doing and how they should follow a process. ADAS technologies are becoming increasingly sophisticated and increasingly responsible for helping drivers avoid collisions, reducing industries, and in many cases, saving lives. As these systems become more prevalent, the industry has an opportunity, and I would argue a responsibility, to align around a common framework that supports confidence in the repair process. That framework focuses, in my opinion, on four foundational pillars. The process, as Joel was talked about, was the OEM procedure identified, followed, and documented. The environment, were the calibration conditions appropriate? Training, was the individual performing the calibration properly qualified? And equipment, was the equipment suitable, maintained, and capable of meeting OEM requirements? While the framework focuses on those four areas, the outcome we're really pursuing is trust. Right? Trust that the vehicle was repaired properly. Trust that the safety systems will perform as intended. Trust that everyone involved in the repair process is working towards the same objective. That leads directly to why documentation is so important. As vehicle technology becomes more advanced, documentation becomes increasingly important, not only for repairers and insurers, but ultimately for the consumers who we all serve. Today, there can be a significant variation in how calibration events are documented. One provider may supply extensive supporting documentation and information, while another may provide only limited documentation or no documentation at all. That inconsistency can make it difficult for insurers, repairers, OEMs, consumers, and other stakeholders to really even understand exactly what was performed and whether it was performed according to manufacturer requirements. This isn't simply a documentation challenge, it's a confidence challenge, in my opinion. Documentation is the mechanism, in my opinion, that allows the industry to demonstrate quality, consistency, and care that went into restoring these safety systems. When documentation becomes more consistent, transparency improves, communication improves, and confidence improves across the entire repair ecosystem. At the end of the day, Paul, we're not talking about standards for the sake of standards. We're talking about creating greater trust, greater transparency, and greater confidence that the technologies designed to protect people continue to do exactly that after the vehicle is repaired. The key message to this, for me, is that the OEM defines the repair procedure. We're not debating that. We're not creating a standard by which we need to follow. The OEM defines the repair procedure. The industry has an opportunity to align around the conditions, the documentation, and transparency necessary to support successful execution of that procedure, ensure that we're returning a safe vehicle to the motoring public. That's it in a nutshell.
Great, thanks, Dan. And I thank you for clarifying what you mean, because I think the term standard can be misinterpreted to a lot of things, and I think you did a great job.
I've had a lot of people I've had to explain what I'm actually talking about.
Joel, I'm going to take it back to you again. So why do ADAS issues continue to happen even as technology I mean, there's a lot of new technology in this space. Yeah. But we seem to be struggling with the same problems. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, and I think, for those that have embraced the technology, I think it's been to their benefit. They're trying to wrap their arms around as quickly as they can as far as what new instances of technology are at their disposal that they can leverage to improve performance, compliance, efficiencies, all these different things. But I don't think it's necessarily been that the technology's been the biggest issue at this particular point, because you've got some tremendous, software and hardware pieces that integrate really well together. In my short answer, I think the biggest issue that I see, and I talk to a lot of shops on a pretty consistent basis, is really in their workflow, and that's where they really start to struggle. Is again, reflecting back to like what I talked about before, like creating that story. So where are we identifying what calibrations need to be done? Where are we submitting off to approval for the insurer to say, hey, we want you to know what needs to be done to this car above and beyond just traditional collision repairs. We need to schedule our services with a sublet potentially, because there are a lot of shops trying to get their arms around whether or not they can do ADAS in-house and trying to understand all the different pieces that are connected with that. And if they can't perform a certain calibration due to conditions not being conducive to performing that calibration, how are we communicating with our sublet? Is our sublet communicating back with us as far as like what their schedules look like? Documentation from our sublets. Is who's responsible for setting up the calls and things like that. So I don't think it's so much, the fact that the technology is prohibiting us from being more efficient, but as much as all of a sudden now we've got a different process that we need to look for as far as our workflows. And I think a lot of ADAS failures and process failures really start there with, again, thinking about how we fix cars can't be the same way now than they were 10 years ago. We've got to completely shift our mindset on continuing to improve and, again, really embracing a lot of that technology because it is going to continue to get thrown at us as far as like what the OEMs are producing. You're seeing a lot more software involved in terms of who's being able to provide information on a quick basis. And again, I think the challenge for shops is like, all right, now we need to develop a new SOP, a new workflow, or enhance our current workflows because we're going to continue to get further and further away if we're not, really embracing a lot of this new technology.
Yeah, I think with the point you make there is, since a lot of shops may share common sublets or suppliers, if there isn't a common best practice that they all understand, everybody's doing it differently. Is that a fair statement? Yeah.
That's a very fair statement. Yeah, and I always think of like, your sublet should be an extension of your production floor, and like how you communicate with them, how you share information with them, and how they share information back with you. There shouldn't be any surprises there. So really an easy way that I talk to shops about, like, think about workflow starting with every car that comes through your shop. Assume you're going to have to perform a calibration until all of your research tells you otherwise, that you don't have to do anything other than a pre and a post scan. If you start with that mentality, and today's a great day to start if you haven't, start today. Think about that as far as every vehicle coming through our shop, our workflow is stage one right here. Now, all the way through to the very end, we've got to be thinking about, can we do this in-house? Do we need to sublet? What's the coordination look like? What's the communication? What's the timeline? We're not going to wait till 3 o'clock on a Friday at the end of the month and expect to get our sublet to help us out, right? We've got to be way out in front of the game. So I think that's, again, kind of going back to my answer, but that workflow piece is really, really critical.
Thank you. Great. Dan, back to you. What are the risks when ADAS recalibrations are performed without a consistent documented process?
Great question, Paul. Really, the risks exist at multiple levels, but they all ultimately lead back to one thing: confidence in the repair outcome. Again, we have to keep the consumer at the center of the universe here, right? First, there's the obvious safety risk. ADAS systems influence braking, steering, lane keeping, collision avoidance, and driver alerts. It's become how the vehicle operates. If OEM procedures, environmental requirements, or validation processes are not followed consistently, there's possibility that these systems may not perform as intended. Second, there's a transparency risk. Without a consistent documented process, it can become difficult for repairers, insurers, OEMs, and consumers to understand exactly what was performed, how it was performed, and whether manufacturer requirements were met. Is that vehicle safe to go back to the consumer? Unless we document it. I used to tell my estimators when I owned a shop, did you call that customer, or did you get confirmation from that insurer? And they say, oh yeah. And I look in the file and it's not documented. I said, no, you didn't do it. Oh yes, I did, Dan. No, you didn't, because you didn't document it. So unless it's documented, we have no evidence. Third, there's an accountability risk. As vehicles become more technologically advanced, stakeholders increasingly need the ability to demonstrate the repairs were performed according to OEM requirements and under the appropriate conditions. Otherwise, a safe repair is in question. The reality is that the calibration quality can vary across the industry. Many providers are performing exceptional work every day. The challenge is that the industry currently lacks a common framework for consistently demonstrating the quality and completeness of that work. Without a consistent documented process, in my opinion, questions can arise about what was done, how it was done, whether OEM requirements were met, and whether the vehicle was returned to the consumer in the condition intended by the manufacturer. Documentation solves that problem. As vehicle technology evolves, all stakeholders share a responsibility to ensure the process surrounding these safety systems evolve as well. A consistent documentation framework, in my opinion, helps create transparency, supports accountability, builds trust, and strengthens confidence that safety systems were restored according to manufacturer requirements. I guess, Paul, my message here is the goal isn't simply to prove that a calibration occurred. The goal is to create confidence that it was performed correctly. In my opinion, in a safety critical process, consistency isn't a luxury, it's a responsibility.
Thanks, Dan. Joel, in some of our earlier conversations, there was a discussion about misconceptions within the industry. Can you take a few minutes and talk about what are those misconceptions and what can we do about them?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few that kind of come to mind, and the one that I hear repeatedly still is that a scan is a calibration. Those two things are different than each other, right? A scan's more of a diagnostic side, where the calibration is the execution of the actual making sure the camera or radar's pointing in the right direction. But I think the biggest one is still that, if there's no fault code, there's no light on the dashboard, there's no sign of any sort of trouble, that there's no calibration needed. And I can tell you that we need to continue to overcome sort of that misconception that just because we're taking a bumper cover off, or we're replacing a windshield, or we're doing an alignment, or disconnecting a battery, or putting on even new tires, that there isn't some sort of calibration that's required by the OEM. So it starts with referencing that OEM research, like right out of the gate, basically, right? So if we're writing our estimate, we're identifying what parts we're replacing, what parts we're R&Ing, what services we're performing to the vehicle that may potentially trigger calibrations. Simply doing a pre-scan and relying on that pre-scan to be our guiding light as far as what calibrations are required is a process in futility. So again, I don't hear it as often as I used to, but it's still something that comes up routinely, that no fault codes, no DTCs for ADAS calibrations in our pre-scan. There's nothing on our dashboard illuminating we've got some sort of issue with an ADAS system, so we must not need to do any calibrations. Well, I can tell you that majority of your calibrations are going to show up outside of a pre-scan. So diagnostics is really one piece of the puzzle, but it's not really the entire decision-making process.
Okay, thank you. Dan, back to you again. You mentioned earlier that the OEMs are responsible for creating the repair procedures. How do we balance those OEM repair procedures with the need for an industry-wide standardized process?
I've been asked this so many times, Paul. I really appreciate you bringing this up, because I don't want people to get confused. We're not advocating for something different than what the OEMs require or recommend. The OEM procedures, let me be real clear, should always remain the authority, period. Every manufacturer designs its systems differently and understands its technology better than anyone else. Why would we even question it? What we're talking about is, what Joel's talking about is educating people to follow a process that will get them from point A to point Z, whatever that is, and create a safe repair by using the OE recommended procedures. But in that, at Keys to Keys, we're talking about, what do we do when the car comes in? As I love Joel's suggestion there of, we should look at every vehicle as this needs to be calibrated, and then look for evidence as to why it shouldn't be, not the other way around. So every manufacturer designs their systems, right, differently. The role of this framework is not to tell technicians how to calibrate a vehicle. The role of the framework is to establish consistency around calibration events and how they're documented and communicated and validated. Think of it this way: the OEM defines the destination. The industry framework, what we're talking about, helps create consistency in how we record the journey. That's it. By respecting the OEM as the authority, while creating common expectations around documentation and transparency, we can both support manufacturer requirements and industry-wide consistency. In fact, one of the primary goals of the framework is to help the industry better support OEM intent. Really, I'd say the key message here is that the framework supports OEM procedures. It does not compete with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the OEM tells you how to perform the calibration, but it doesn't tell you how to document it and how to share it with the vehicle owner and the insurance company and the other stakeholders in the process.
Exactly. And as Joel, Joel talks about this a lot, the shops don't necessarily understand a process that they can follow consistently to produce consistent results, to get the customer taken care of the way that they want to take care of them, to, get reimbursed properly, to have the documentation to bill properly. There's a whole chain of events that go on. We're not talking about changing what the OEM's asking to do. As a matter of fact, we're looking for a way to enhance and document and prove that vehicle was repaired per OEM requirements and recommendations.
Great, thank you. Joel, in your world, what does a successful ADAS workflow look like?
It's a great question, because we get asked this quite often, and a lot of like what we've built has been based on our customer feedback and working with our folks as far as like what does a workflow that includes improvements in relation to ADAS really look like. And first and foremost, it starts with doing your research on the OEM service information, and validating repair requirements through diagnostics. So it's plugging in your scan tool, doing your pre-scan, what systems are connected, what systems are telling you that there's potential fault codes, and then researching what those fault codes are and what additional things you need to do with those things. And then, from ensuring calibration needs are reflected in your estimate, getting those on your estimate or your RO early in the process versus late in the process can be all the difference between having that negotiation conversation with the insurance company or them kicking it back to you saying, hey, we're declining this because we weren't made aware of it until the car was buttoned up. You're ready to ship the car off to your customer. So getting out in front of that early and often. So I really think of it as, preliminary estimate. You're thinking about, all right, what are we doing to this vehicle that potentially is going to trigger calibrations? Where are we putting that on the estimate at this particular point, and not necessarily line iteming those manually as just saying calibration, but putting in there, defining exactly what you're calibrating or what other services you're doing from a manual entry standpoint, so that it's very clear. The documentation substantiates what needs to be done or why it needs to be done. And then from there, once the calibrations are completed, validating through proof of pictures that this was our setup, this was our environment, this was the picture of the gas tank, or whatever the OEM requirements are as far as performing that calibration. As Dan said, I don't think you can necessarily over document in these instances where that's where we see a big amount of breakdown in terms of the workflow, the pushback, the kickback, whatever you want to call it. So really from start to finish, every vehicle that comes through your shop, thinking about from early on in the process from preliminary estimate to the time the car gets dropped off, doing your pre-scan, reviewing that scan report. You've got the vehicle now in tear down and blueprint, reviewing your initial scan report or OEM procedures as they are related to doing those calibrations, and then following through with your traditional collision repair. And then if the procedures are calling for certain static calibrations that you need to sublet, again, getting in contact with your sublets to get an early and communicating with them so that they've got things on their schedule to help you out and be able to provide a great customer experience for your shared customer with them. So, that's, really that's where I see things. And again, having a lot of conversations with shops, it may not necessarily be a one size fits all sort of workflow, but I think those are really key points that shops can kind of focus on. And again, early in the process is better than waiting till towards the end to try to figure out what you need to do from a calibration standpoint.
Great, thanks. Well, Dan, I know that you're passionate about this topic. So from your perspective, what should be included in a proper ADAS calibration documentation for keys to keys?
Well, so, there's a laundry list of things. I'll hit some key points, but to add to a little bit of what Joel was saying, one of the challenges that the industry has and people have in this is understanding really what should be done, what kind of a process they can establish to actually prove they're doing it and doing it right. And rather than taking a stab at a process and then documenting what they've done, we feel that we can support the industry to learn and understand and do a better job if we give them a roadmap. If we say, okay, here's what you should be documenting, then they can develop their own processes inside of that in order, as long as they're documenting the process, right? So it's kind of almost backing into it, reverse engineering it, if you will. But the goal should really be to complete a transparent record of the calibration event, right? Documentation should include everything from like the basic estimate stuff, vehicle identification information, the reason the calibration was required. This is where I like Joel's, statement around go into every vehicle thinking it should, because the reality is, I mean, I'm not one that's great with statistics. Jimmy could probably validate and back all this up, but 37% of vehicles are being calibrated, and really it should be 85 or 87% if we really take a look at the car park. But so, I like Joel's approach that every car needs to be recalibrated, and then figure out why it shouldn't be. But anyway, so the reason that the calibration is required, the OEM procedures reference, right? The pre-scan results, the environmental conditions, the environment or the equipment, the software that was used, technician qualifications, calibration results, post-calibration verification, test drives, validation, final delivery documentation, billing, right? If we could arrive at some sort of a standardized format for billing that insurers could then grab and say, okay, this meets, we agree that this is how bills should be submitted. Boy, wouldn't that take some friction out of the system and conversations about getting paid, right? Photos should be used extensively and then decided by, what do we need in the standard to upload, right? As long as we got plenty of evidence to back that up. Ultimately, the documentation should tell a complete story, what was performed and how it was performed, right? Complete documentation benefits, in my opinion, every stakeholder. It helps repairers support reimbursement discussions and negotiations. It helps insurers with claim validation and subrogation efforts. And it provides a transparent record should questions ever arise in the future. Heaven forbid anybody ends up in court and there's a liability issue. If you don't have documentation of what you did, that a jury or a court or a lawyer, would go, hey, they didn't do this job, or wouldn't you rather show up with a bulletproof, airtight documentation package that shows everything you did so you don't end up losing your business? Most importantly, it creates confidence that the vehicle is restored according to the manufacturer's requirements. This goes back to the whole issue I mentioned earlier, trust. Trust in everybody in the chain of custody of that vehicle. Trust in the consumer, and the consumer's trust in us that we're doing the right thing. Really, my message here is that the documentation should provide a complete and understandable record of the calibration journey from vehicle intake to vehicle delivery. Keys to keys, as you said, Paul.
Thank you. So Joel, if shops could look for one thing that they could do that would have an immediate impact, what would you recommend?
I think there's a couple things that I would mention here, but I think for an immediate impact is really that's the educational side of things, like understanding exactly what these ADAS systems do. Not necessarily like, identifying when they need to be recalibrated, but truly understanding what does a forward-facing camera do? What does a blind spot indicator do? I mean, it's the education side, I think, is still the big lacking piece. But then the other side of this, and I think even Frank just mentioned this too, which it's documentation. The clear lack of understanding, like what documentation is necessary to substantiate what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, how is it done, what are all the variables that are included. There are a lot of shops that are performing the right work, doing things correctly when it comes to execution or sublet, but they're not being able to prove it afterward. I think that's the biggest struggle for them, and I think that's really one area of improvement that the shop, if they look back and said, what's one thing that's really missing at this particular point that we could improve on? It's certainly the documentation, and then subsequent to that too is the educational side. Educate your teams, your staff. It's got to be from front to back, and everybody in between that's part of your team. It's a culture movement of we're all in on this. Whether we're doing some in-house, we're subletting everything, or we've got a hybrid approach on how we perform calibrations. Everybody's got to be bought into it. It can't be just the estimator or the production manager or the owner or somebody else. It's got to be the entire team that's really focused on it so that there's a shared layer of intelligence. The workflows are airtight, and from that documentation standpoint, it's solid from top to bottom, and there's really no concerns at that particular point.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I think we've done a good job of defining the challenge that we face as an industry. So Jimmy, I'm going to change over to you now. As the co-chair of the CIECA AI committee, do you see an overlap, or do you see an opportunity for CIECA to play a role in helping to solve this problem?
Absolutely. And that's really what we're here to solve using CIECA. And if we can think about CIECA, the history of it, the guardrails, the infrastructure that it's provided, now we need to really understand how to remove those periods of uncertainty for people in the process. How do we identify it really quick? I saw some great comments coming up, and we got 119 people now viewing our session, and I really appreciate them. That means that they're probably enrolled and involved in trying to solve this as well. But what we're really looking for now is how do we attach this transparency, this documentation to a file? We get it very early on recognized, and then be able to bring this through the process. So, as Dan was talking about, that we can produce some type of evidence that the right thing was done for the customer. And that way, we've removed any of these periods of uncertainty. The tech knew they did the right thing. The customer is very well assured that their car is back to those OE conditions. But I believe that CIECA is the platform for it. And I think that with this, you're probably going to see us really push this from an architectural standpoint a lot during the next year.
Great, thank you. Okay, Dan, obviously there's a lot of stakeholders involved in every
Right.
Collision claim. What are the benefits to the industry if we can develop a good process here?
Well, it's a big answer to that. But if I boil it right down to it, the industry has an opportunity to really save lives. I mean, I'm doing this because, I still want to give back to the industry. And I'm doing this because I want to make a difference and I want to save lives. I think the industry, we have an opportunity to come together. I think we're going through a stage of confusion. This industry has gone through moments of clarity and moments of confusion. I think the industry has a level of confusion right now, and I think ADAS is one of the things that is kind of causing that. So to answer the question, I think alignment benefits everyone because it creates a shared understanding. It's a way to bring people together around a flag, right? To rally the cause, rally the troops, and bring people together with a common cause. Repairers gain greater clarity around expectations. One, they can learn more about what they should be doing, because at the end of the day, and there's a big, misnomer out in the industry bouncing around that, I don't need to worry about it. I sub that out, so they've got the liability. I want to put an end to that one right now. If you take the customer's keys, you now have care and custody of that vehicle. You're responsible for everything that happens, including the sublet. So liability you need to understand that. But repairers gain greater clarity around expectations, right? One thing I consistently hear from the insurers is that they want greater visibility into the repair process. They're not looking to manage the repair per se. Yeah, they want to manage cost, but they're looking for confidence that the repair they're paying for was performed according to manufacturer requirements. They want validation of the operations, right? Technology providers gain opportunities to build solutions around common data structures and workflows. And Jimmy's right on the money here when he says CIECA needs to play a big role in this, because all the data sets, everything as we go through documenting a process, guess what? We're moving information. And CIECA is the place that sets the standard for how we move information in this industry. I don't think CIECA is the place to actually create the actual workflow per se. That's, we're already, and I'll talk about an initiative we've launched to do that. But CIECA absolutely has to be involved and is going to play a huge role in this. The OEMs benefit from greater consistency in how their procedures are documented and communicated, and the fact that they can take solace in the fact that we're focused on following their procedures. But most importantly, I get back to the consumers. They benefit because confidence in the repair process increases. What's unique about this initiative is that every stakeholder benefits from success. There are very few opportunities, in my opinion, in our industry where repairers, insurers, OEMs, technology providers, and the consumers all win simultaneously. It's typically, well, I win, you lose, or I win better than you win. Here, I think everybody can come together for the common good, putting a safe vehicle back on the road, and everybody should rally behind that. Greater consistency and transparency around ADAS repairs is one of those opportunities in my mind. The common thread through all this, as I said earlier, is trust. And the message here for me is when the industry speaks a common language, everyone benefits, especially the consumer. We just need to get on the same page and start speaking the same language. That's all.
Great, thank you. And thanks for clarifying. I agree with you. I don't think it's CIECA's role to develop those processes, but once those processes are done and the documentation exists, we need to be able to exchange that information between stakeholders, and that's definitely CIECA's role.
Absolutely, and that's a big piece of this. Absolutely.
Agreed. Okay, Jimmy, back to you. So as technology improves to more accurately identify damage to the components and sensors that support ADAS, what industry support do we need to address the technology?
Yeah, what we have now is the ability to take an image of a car very early on, and from that image we can really pinpoint the damage. We now know enough through data that we can start to really identify what components are damaged. While we probably could not put some of those internal components on an estimate, we could certainly put them on a parts order, and then be able to have those on hand. Again, taking the mystery out of it, that these parts are in jeopardy somewhere in the supply chain, that these parts need to be installed and need to be recalibrated back to the standards. So we've really moved the ability to take a look at a car far left in the process. But here's the deal. With our infrastructure and our architecture, we're not yet taking advantage of the technologies that we have at hand. So that's the thing that we really need to start to support, is the ability to quickly identify, the ability to get the right resources in order. We're talking about parts and people, and the ability to have this documented through.
Yep.
But we're in a good shape now because a lot of this stuff has been invented. A lot of this stuff has been rolled out. And there's a lot in the process that we have dealerships. Let's not even talk about collision shops, but we're seeing components that are damaged when they come into a dealership. We have the ability now to scan cars as they come into a dealership, and that type of work should be listed on a service as well, a collision and also automotive service.
Great, thank you. It strikes me that with all of this documentation, if there was a common set of best practices that the industry could follow for the documentation, it seems like it would be ripe for AI to be able to really help drive that process.
Yeah.
But if we don't have a common set of best practices, what are you building AI to?
Right.
So yeah. Okay, so Joel, if you could change one thing about how the industry approaches ADAS, what would it be?
Oh man, I would really stop treating ADAS as really a calibration problem. I think it for me it just comes back to workflow. Really, it's creating a repeatable process. Car by car, uh, shop by shop. It's really comes back to I think the shops that'll win over the next few years are the ones that are able to connect data, people, processes, documentation into really a repeatable process. And again, as I mentioned before, if you really haven't started on your ADOS journey as of yet, today's a great day to start and really think about how to shift the narrative within your shop to say, we can't continue to fix cars the same way we did even a couple of years ago because the technology is just so far removed as far as what we need to do and what's triggering calibrations but again, I really think it's not thinking of it as a calibration problem, but more of like how do we start solving for workflow car by car. And I really think that comes back to, and like I mentioned before, and it's been said that there's no one size fits all necessarily, but I believe there is for every shop, there can be a repeatable process that comes into place. And the minute that car hits the parking lot, that process goes into action immediately.
Thanks. Jimmy, how would you prioritize the next steps for the industry? And what is your wish list to resolve the gaps we've been talking about here today?
If I had a wish list, right now we have 118 people on the seminar. I guarantee you that if we got these 118 people, again, I'm seeing some fantastic comments come up, and the right players in the room, I believe that we now have the ability to architect out a very smooth transaction. If we take a look at the rails that have been laid for us, by people that came many years before us, we're very ripe for it. It's no different than what the ACH system is that transports our financial platforms. There's no difference. And that tends to grow a little bit over time as banking standards improve. I think that we need to follow that model, and that would be my wish list. Now, one of the biggest gaps that we do have is being able to note that there is damage. We can recognize it with visual AI, and then being able to go back against the database. And I believe the CIECA members that we have in play now, when I've looked at them, at least 3 to 4, if we had access to that database, we could bring those forward. We can provide it into a very succinct document. We could just use LLM models. No need to have very sophisticated AI visual assessment tools. You can just use LLM, no different than a chat GPT attached to these. And then we could really develop a very good tested and true and refined documented process that we could supply. But again, I know it's a big wish list, but we do have all the tools. And I think that with the right leadership that we have in place, we're going to be able to start to deliver on some of these.
Okay, thank you.
Good point.
Dan, any closing thoughts?
Oh, Paul, you know me, I've got a lot of thoughts. So, with the risk at rambling on just a little bit, I think this is a tremendous opportunity. Is your previous question about, I think it's a great opportunity for the industry to come together. If we look at throughout the history of vehicle repair in our industry, we've successfully adapted to every major advancement in vehicles, from the horse and buggy days. But most recently, vehicle safety, from seat belts to airbags and now to advanced driver assist systems. ADAS technology represents just another important step in that evolution. Moving forward, success will require collaboration, period. We have to work together. We cannot be at odds. We can't have, one group saying we shouldn't do it that way or we shouldn't do it this way. Those details will work out if everybody comes together with the idea that we're going to solve this problem and we're going to keep the consumer as the true North Star and we're going to fix cars properly. we can solve this problem. You know, repairers, OEMs, insurers, calibration providers, technology companies, the industry organizations, they all have a important role to play all the way through. You know, associations, everybody has a role to play here. If we remain focused on transparency, consistency, and again, I get back to the consumer safety and trust, we can build a framework that strengthens the confidence in vehicle repairs and that supports long-term success in our industry. That's what we need, is a clear path. This initiative for me is not about proving who's right. It's not about proving who's doing it wrong. This is about creating a framework that gives consumers confidence that the safety technology designed to protect them, this is what it's designed to do, is protect them, was restored properly after the repair. People, some tend to want to put profit over people. We need to put people over profit. The profits will follow if we're doing the right thing. Every one of us in this industry plays a role in returning vehicles to the consumers after a collision. Increasingly, we're not just repairing vehicles. We're restoring technologies. These are computers now. We're restoring technologies that help people avoid crashes, reduce injuries, and in many cases saves lives. These are complex systems and they need to be addressed as such. That responsibility belongs to all of us. Nobody gets a sidestep on this one, right? The opportunity before us is not to create another standard. That's not what we want to do. We don't want to create complication. We want to create clarity. The opportunity is to create greater trust, greater transparency, and greater confidence in how these safety critical repairs are performed and documented. That's it. End of story. If OEMs, the repairers, the insurers, the calibration providers, the technology companies, the industry organizations can continue to work together or come together, we have an opportunity to strengthen the repair ecosystem, better serve the people who ultimately matter most, the consumers. That's the headstream of the revenue stream, right? The headwaters of the revenue stream. The consumers, they entrust us with their safety every day. At the end of the day, ADAS standards are not about vehicles, they're about people. Really, if to close this out, I would have a call to action here. My call to action is simple: get involved. I've been talking to people. There's a group of us that we're establishing a not-for-profit organization to accomplish this. Our steering committee is going to be meeting in Chicago in July. If anyone's interested in participating and supporting this effort, please reach out to me or Eric Bickett, who happens to be one of the founding members of CIECA. Surprise, surprise, he's involved in helping us get a standardized process going to document ADAS. Whether you're an OEM, a repairer, an insurer, technology provider, again, a calibration specialist, or an industry association, it doesn't matter. Your perspective matters. The strongest framework here, in my opinion, will be built through collaboration, not mandate. And we're on the verge of being mandated, by the way, for those of you that have not been paying attention to what's going on in the legislative side of this. So, if we keep consumer safety, OEM intent, and industry transparency at the center of the conversation, we can create something that benefits the entire industry and the people we serve, the consumer. Let's not wait for inconsistency to become a larger problem, right? Let's come together now. This is my call, is build trust and build a trust framework that the next generation of vehicle safety technology deserves. The ultimate goal here is simple. Every consumer should have confidence that the safety systems on their vehicle were restored properly after repair. That's it. If we keep that goal at the center of our discussions, the industry will move forward together. Will strengthen public trust and help ensure that technologies designed to protect people continue to do exactly that. My closing sentence would be, together we can save lives. And I've probably overstated my my message at this point, but I wanted to pound it home. We need to get this done, people.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Well, that completes our questions. So we now can take questions from the attendees. Stacy Phillips is our marketing director and has been monitoring the webinar for questions. Stacy, do we have some questions for the panel?
Yes, one of our attendees mentioned the automakers using different sensors, software, and ADAS features. And the participant mentioned that it's challenging to get industry alignment. And I'm just wondering what the three of you would comment or have any recommendations.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a great question. I think it's the big challenge is could the OEMs all get together and use the same nomenclature, identify the ADAS systems and use the same technology, which isn't really in their game plan as far as my understanding goes. So it's imperative, and we talked about it, kind of at the top of the call as far as, doing that research early in the process as far as, whether you're referencing an identification tool that's using all data or repair logic or directly from OEM service information, using that information directly from the OEM to surface up, what that ADAS system does, how it operates, what's it critical for, explaining that in your notes on your estimate or your RO, because they aren't the same, and they're probably never going to be the same as far as from one vehicle manufacturer to the next. So it's imperative to do that research and not necessarily get complacent in thinking they're all necessarily the same or doing the exact same thing from manufacturer to manufacturer.
Yeah, and we're lucky if they even publish something to begin with. We're starting to see, and we'll see more of these offshore imports that are coming in, particularly those that are being imported into Canada and Mexico, and they're Chinese type EVs. We're going to see those come into our borders. So we're going to see them come in from California. I don't even know if those even have anything published, so that's where we have to start. I know it sounds very routine, but it has to start at the very beginning. When you import or build a car, you should have to be mandated. I know, Dan, you didn't like mandates. I do like mandates around, and a manufacturer has to at least supply the data. And we know with right to repair where that's going. We don't even know if they do publish it, it'll be even in the hands of all the technicians that should be working on it.
Jimmy, you make a really good point, because mandating at certain levels is actually wonderful. The challenge we have, though, and the question's a good one, given vehicles where they're manufactured, the suppliers that have contracts with these OEs, et cetera, we're so far away from being able to come up with some sort of standardized sensors and how to calibrate across multiple makes and models. That's just not in our future. I don't think I'll be alive if that happens. In this case, we're playing cards at a table, and it'd be nice to be dealt 4 aces every time, but we have to play the hand we're dealt. And right now, we have to figure it out. We have to be detectives. We have to create as many tools and processes and technology, as Jimmy was talking about and Joel's talked about, to be able to deal with what's on our plate today and fix cars today. That's a future state that would be nice, but again, I don't see it coming anytime soon.
Yeah, and some of these cars that are being manufactured now and imported to our country, there's no dealership network around for them. So they're inventing a mobile service fleet. You're going to see a big push towards mobile service, and those will be in major markets. You'll just have big, large vans that come out and do service in a person's driveway for one of these imported vehicles. But you cannot tell me that if something happens that they're going to be able to recalibrate that car, particularly an EV that has a lot of self-steering and a lot of self-driving aspects to it. EVs are the definition of ADAS, right? So I don't understand how that's going to happen. But again, that's something that we're going to have to tackle. We're all, adults. We're going to have to figure out how to address that in our systems for the consumers.
Our next question is, how do we create a general understanding as to what ADAS is seeking to accomplish, and then train how each OEM seeks to achieve the guiding outcome? once I'll share the comment. Once we can standardize that, the next question is, how do we ensure proof of a calibration deliverable so bill payers and consumers know that what was paid for was actually completed?
Well, that second part of the question, I'm not sure I understood the first part, but the second part of the question is exactly what I'm talking about, is documenting the process that that vehicle went through to actually have the calibration. Once you've got that, and we have some type of, documentation, photos, etc., that everything was done properly, then you've got what you need to bill and to get reimbursed. From my perspective, I think the process, documenting the process, helps solve that problem.
Yeah.
Thank you. And with OEMs increasingly managing diagnostic parts, how do you see the relationship shifting between independent ADAS calibration providers and dealership networks over the next few years?
You, who wants to take that? You want my honest opinion? I think there's a challenge that exists at all levels in this industry for those that are claiming to be able to do ADAS calibration properly. And I'm going to try to be politically correct here. There's a lot of people doing things absolutely right. There's a lot of dealerships that are made the investment and understand the problem and understand the opportunity and are absolutely calibrating vehicles correctly. The flip side of that, there's a large number of independents and people that say they know how to calibrate that are not doing it correct. In some cases, it's because they don't understand how to do it correct. Other cases, they're just bad actors doing bad things, in my opinion. Dealerships are similar, and I don't think there's dealerships necessarily bad actors doing bad things. They don't really understand it. And so a lot of people send vehicles to the dealership, and the dealership really doesn't understand how to calibrate that vehicle. And that again goes back to education and opportunity and documenting a process rather than just having an invoice from a dealership. They should document the process as well, in my opinion.
If we think about that, if you go to SEMA or any of the events that have architects there, then they start to show models of future shops, future dealerships, and then if you look at them and you look at them with a jaundiced eye, with ADAS in mind, then you ask the architect that's designing these that if you have plans today, it's going to be realized in 5 years. Where is the ADAS room? So you can't even put your finger on a map with geography inside of an architect's plan on where that'll even happen. If that doesn't exist, how is the other stuff going to happen?
Right.
Thank you. And we're running out of time, and I was just wondering if anyone wants more information and to get involved. Joel, can you share a little bit of information about the collaborative that you're working on?
Sure.
And
Yeah,
if
happy
there's
to.
opportunities for our viewers?
Yeah, and it's kind of similar to like what Dan and I think you and Jimmy mentioned as well, as far as getting involved. We need to get everybody kind of collectively into the same mindset that we can all work together, and there's plenty of room and opportunity for us to all really grow and flourish in the next few years as it relates to ADAS. And we launched the United ADAS Collective back about 16 months ago, and it was really designed to be a place where folks can go for a lot of different things, from education to thought leadership to where we host webinars. To doing in-person events. We just hosted our first 2-day leadership summit at SEMA Garage in Detroit, which was a great event. And what we really saw across sort of the social landscape and some other threads out there is that we need more people gravitating towards this side of the industry, and everybody had to start from somewhere, right? So none of us necessarily fell out of the sky and all of a sudden knew how to do calibrations or do diagnostics or all of these things right out of the gate. So we've all had to learn to some degree. And I think what a lot of folks are trying to do is demonstrate that they had what they thought was the right approach to performing calibrations. And as Dan has mentioned, there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And some of these folks were just getting beat over the head on some of these social platforms. So we launched the collective. It's unitedadascollective.org if you want to sign up. There's no cost to join. We've got roughly 1,600 members. You'll see even today there's been questions surfaced up around specifics on how to perform calibrations. There's been different conversations around different industry initiatives. And it's really, I think, a great place for folks to go and socialize and ask questions and continue to learn and kind of build each other up. And yeah, Stacy, thanks for the couple of minutes here to kind of to talk about that. But if anybody has any questions on that or wants more information, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, Joel, Jimmy, Dan, thank you very much. This has been highly informative, and I really appreciate you taking time to
Wish we had
share
more
this
time.
with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could have kept going. We will have the CIECA Connects conference in San Antonio, Texas from September 29th to October 1st. Everyone's invited. We encourage you to come out and join us and learn what's going on in the world with CIECA and technology related to the collision industry. And with that, I would like to thank you. And this presentation has been recorded and will be available later today at CIECA.com.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody.
everybody.
Joel
Thanks,
and Jimmy,
everybody.
it was great. Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it, guys.
Stacy.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.